You know, one of the big criticisms of SpongeBob after the first three seasons has always been that it feels very watered down. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel and another installment of my SpongeBob SquarePants review series. Today we're talking about the second film, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. I already reviewed the first three seasons of this show, as well as the first movie, and I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description in case you missed either of them. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts on Sponge Out of Water in the comments below if you've seen it. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there and growing the community. And if you are new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. This takes place during a fight between the Krusty Krab and Plankton, in which the secret formula disappears and all of Bikini Bottom goes into a terrible apocalypse. The Bikini Bottomites go crazy and they all believe that SpongeBob and Plankton stole the secret formula. The two new teammates then create a time machine to get the secret formula before it disappears and also go to some weird places along the way. This is directed by Paul Tibbett, one of the show's writers and directors who took over as the showrunner once Stephen Hillenburg left after season 3. And this comes from a story by him and Hillenburg, though the actual screenplay is written by Jonathan Abel and Glenn Berger, who also wrote the Kung Fu Panda movies as well as the Trolls movies for DreamWorks. This was released 11 years after the first movie, but the idea of a SpongeBob sequel floated around, no pun intended, for years, almost immediately after the first movie actually. And Tibbett, who was with the show from day one, had some of the same reservations about a sequel that Hillenburg himself had when making the first movie. He said how SpongeBob works so well because it's presented in 11-minute episodes, and making a movie is a challenge. And it's worth noting that comment, as what's interesting here is that even though this shares some of the same qualities as the first movie, which I'll get to more in a moment, this actually feels even more so just like an extended episode of the show than the first movie did. Like, both movies to a degree feel that way, as they both nail that same SpongeBob cadence. But the first film really felt like SpongeBob went on this grand, epic adventure, and the stakes felt higher for him than ever before, at least up until that point in the show. Here, you don't get that sense as much. This still has SpongeBob going on this grand adventure, but unlike the first movie where there was this level of emotional intensity that we normally don't get in the show, here it's still presented in the same way as it would be if we were to encounter this situation on the show itself. Like, anytime SpongeBob goes somewhere new, it's treated more like an extended gag rather than this cool new place he's going to that kicks things up a notch. Even though this was a theatrical release, I could have also seen this made as something that was made for TV as well, going straight to Nickelodeon as a special episode of the show. Now, does that mean it doesn't work? No, actually. In fact, I had a pretty good time with this. I never saw it before watching it for this series, and I wasn't sure what to expect. As I stated in my review of the show, I'm really not the biggest fan of SpongeBob post Stephen Hillenburg. Like, it's okay, but it just doesn't pack that same punch as those first three seasons did. And even though Hillenburg came back as a producer here, his role wasn't as hands-on as it was 10 years prior. But this was still good, and honestly, probably better than most of the stuff I've seen on the show in the most recent years. What I at least appreciate is that the screenwriters Abel and Berger do manage to capture the essence of what makes SpongeBob so enjoyable. I did find a couple of things questionable here and there, like when Bikini Bottom goes into chaos, even the more sensible characters totally lose it too, like Sandy and Squidward, which I don't know is something I'd see them normally do. But otherwise, they managed to capture the characters' personalities really well, especially as two people who never worked on the show before. I'd say this film isn't as witty or as bizarre as we're used to seeing in SpongeBob. Like, most of the humor revolves around broader jokes like characters screaming, yelling, overreacting to something. Even the way they comment on a situation, it's a little more straightforward. Like, the fact these two wrote for DreamWorks also makes a whole lot of sense, as you can kinda tell just by the way some of the jokes are written in this very reactionary manner. There's this very DreamWorks sense of humor to it. Like, some of the jokes will simply be characters commenting on something weird, but they'll simply say it in a very straight-faced but offhand way that something doesn't sound right, which is a trait I feel like we've seen in a number of DreamWorks movies. But there were more jokes that hit than missed, especially once we get introduced to a time-traveling element, where SpongeBob and Plankton try traveling back to the moment that the Krabby Patty formula was stolen. There were some really solid jokes thrown in there, especially when we get introduced to a character named Bubbles the Dolphin, who's this overseer of the galaxy, and he'll have normal conversations with characters before having sudden fits of screeching like a regular dolphin, which often made for some fun gags that I liked. Now, one thing worth noting is that the film is heavily marketed as being more in the real world, where live action people are interacting with SpongeBob and his friends as superheroes. If you haven't seen this film by now, then you should know that it's actually only one part of the movie, which is the final third, similar to the first film. Now, there is an ongoing storyline with Antonio Banderas, who's the only big name addition here, as a pirate called Burgerbeard, and this is where we see some elements of that bizarre humor SpongeBob's known for. He reads the plot of the movie to a bunch of seagulls, and it's in this book that allows the author to make any of the text come to life, and he's able to control the paths characters take. And in the third act is when SpongeBob and his friends actually cross paths with him, even though the book doesn't say events would pan out this way. And it was pretty funny, but I'm a bit mixed on this. I read some people really didn't like these sequences, and I agree they're some of the weaker moments of the movie, but I thought they weren't bad. I do think Antonio Banderas himself was good here. I've always seen him as a guy who's willing to go all in on some of the most ridiculous concepts, maybe not to the level as, say, Nicolas Cage, but he'll have no problem reading some of the most ridiculous lines of dialogue with a totally straight face. But I've always had a thing when SpongeBob tries stretching out live action scenes more than they should. I think they're absolutely brilliant for a quick cutaway gag, and they're some of my favorite moments on the show, but when they're stretched out for longer than, say, a couple of minutes at best, they start to lose me a bit. And that's what happens here. Like, I know the first film also set part of the story in the real world, but it was still only a very small part of the movie, and the focus was still more on the animated characters, with the few live action actors thrown in there in a more supporting role. That wasn't the case here, where even though the real world stuff's only one part of the film, the interaction between animated and live action characters was much more prominent. The problem for me is that the live action material tries to capture that same zaniness and off the wall nature of the show to keep the tone consistent, and I get that. I respect that and I appreciate it, as you want to have a consistent tone in your movies. But with SpongeBob, as an extended plot point, I just don't see it working all that well. It comes off as a bit too forced after a while, trying to have live action performers take on very cartoonish mannerisms and deliver lines in a similar manner to SpongeBob, Patrick, and everyone else. It doesn't land as well. It was never why I was even the biggest fan of the Patchy the Pirate material in the show, and we get 10 minutes of him trying to do some shtick that the animated characters are doing. I appreciate the efforts, I really do. It's just some things only work as animation, and some things only work as live action. Overall, this is by no means some of the best SpongeBob material we've seen, but it's also not a bad movie. It's quite enjoyable, actually. The humor is a little broader this time around, but at the end of the day, it still captures the essence of what makes SpongeBob so enjoyable in the first place, through some fast-paced jokes, quick wit, and energetic performances by the cast that make this a solid watch. The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water, gets a 7.5 out of 10. So stay tuned, I'll have my review of the brand new movie Sponge on the Run out shortly, followed by a ranking of all three films. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see Sponge Out of Water, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like it more than the first movie, less than the first movie? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.